The theory of change is that prizes catalyze innovation by creating step changes as opposed to sort of slow incremental changes that normally are the lifespan of a startup. It takes about 15 years from ideation to really being something commercialized. How do you really compress that time into something that really can respond to real-time challenges way faster? And this is the model of prizes.
Hey there. Welcome to The Climate Cycle, a podcast focused on Canada's climate tech ecosystem. In each episode, we sit down with founders building climate solutions right here in Canada to better understand the challenges presented by climate change and what we can do about it. Most conversations about funding early-stage climate tech include the usual suspects: government grants to fund R&D and then venture capital to scale up. Both matter, but can leave a gap for companies that have proven the science, but haven't de-risked enough for investors. That gap is exactly where philanthropic capital is built to operate. Unlike venture or institutional capital, it doesn't necessarily need a financial return. It needs a measurable impact. That changes the risk. It can move earlier, fund things that wouldn't make sense for a VC, and deploy at the moment when capital actually tips a company from promising to investable. But despite its potential, less than 2% of philanthropic giving goes to climate. Our guest today is looking to change that. Galith Levy is the CEO and co-founder of the Climate Solutions Prize, a dedicated philanthropic platform for climate innovation, deploying capital at the moment it matters most. Since 2020, they've deployed more than $12 million in awards and unlocked over $120 million in follow-on investment for winners. I've been curious about how philanthropy can play a larger role in getting climate ventures over some of these key inflection points. Most climate giving seems to flow towards early stage research or nonprofit advocacy, with very little deployed at the commercialization stage. I wanted to get Galith's take on the state of climate giving in Canada and how they're structuring the Climate Solutions Prize to act as a catalyst. We talk about the structural argument for prizes and how they've unlocked progress in the past, what's slowing philanthropic capital from deploying into climate and how that's changing, and a lot more. And now, my conversation with Galith. Galith, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Justin, for having me. Very excited to be on your show.
Yeah, really glad we could set this up. So we're going to talk a lot about the prize and how it's structured and how you think about kind of unlocking this potential. I'd love to start with a little bit about your own background, though, because this was something when we were talking I found super interesting. So you come from investment banking. How did you find your way to starting the Climate Solutions Prize? Was there like a particular moment where this idea clicked?
I started investment banking. I think it was a great school, really to learn how capital moves. But then I wanted to move capital to something very impactful, which was really my journey into philanthropy. So taking that background, that expertise, that knowledge and know-how into really solving major challenges. So initially I started in community philanthropy and then moving into social infrastructure philanthropy. But then really in 2019 was so compelled by what was scientifically said and proven around climate change. And I figured being a mother of four and really wanting to do the biggest impact with my philanthropic work, tried to pivot all of that into climate philanthropy. So mobilizing donors, endowments, foundations who make maybe money through the investment banking world, but really trying to catalyze that into something more impactful.
And when you were kind of first looking in this area, like looking at climate change as a problem to tackle, what did that landscape look like from your perspective? Like, do you remember anything from that kind of first exploration when you were looking, where can I have an impact?
Yeah, we really wanted to sort of look at where can one person do the most. There was a lot of activism. There's a lot of, voices around shaping policy and what we should be doing, which is really important and all great. But we really kind of wanted to be laser focused on climate action, where we felt the background and our knowledge and know-how can really catalyze and catapult innovation at warp speed. We felt that to meet our strategic goals of 2030 and 2040 and beyond, innovation that was around wasn't scaled in the timeline that is needed to scaled. And then there's challenges for innovation that doesn't yet exist. So how do we really mobilize that ecosystem around being able to in a timeline, obviously, that is also needed, because that's also one of the biggest challenge. The gap is the timeline, the scalability, and being able to take that into a commercial phase that is actually investable and really solving a real challenge.
Yeah, I love the way you frame that. And like, if we were to list out the key challenges here, I feel like those check all the boxes. I'd love to talk about the prize model specifically, because you could have built a grant program, it could have been a fund, it could have been a venture capital firm. Why a prize? Like, why did you land on that model?
So that's a great question. When we were really analyzing how that impact can do something in real time, historically prizes have catalyzed technology advancement way faster than other models. And so, sort of much like the Olympics, why do you jump higher? I don't know, it's like,
Yeah,
run
yeah.
faster. So how do you mobilize that desire to just do better and surpass what already exists? And so prizes are the theory of changes that prizes catalyze innovation by creating step changes as opposed to sort of slow incremental changes that normally are the lifespan of a startup. It takes about, let's say, 15 years from ideation to really being something commercialized. How do you really compress that time into something that really can respond to real-time challenges way faster? And this is the model of prizes. If you think of the first commercial plane was a competition, but it revolutionized the whole aviation industry as we know it today. So this was the important to really do something with philanthropy, which really is not something that we hear all the time around climate, but at warp speed.
And I agree, it's not a model you see a lot, but it's really, I think that analogy to other historical prizes is very well taken. And I like the Olympics analogy, where you see world records getting, set over and over again, and just that, raising the bar. I want to talk too, because I know there's a lot that happens beyond just the funding. But one of the metrics that really jumped out to me, and you talked about making companies investable. There's this idea of the leverage ratio and how much follow-on capital is really unlocked for some of the prize winners. Could you talk about what actually happens in that? Like, how does that follow-on capital happen? What does this change for some of those investors down the line?
So the base point of why philanthropy is, it's the ROI and the expectations are different in the philanthropic world versus the VC, the private equity, et cetera, and the mega large financial institutions, where you're more risk averse, where you have stakeholders and really a return on investment that you have to really abide by. But with philanthropy, you have the agility and the ability to move in a different pace and in a different way, and hence the ROIs are different. This was why we wanted to really tackle on from that framework, which is really different than others, and to kind of de-risk those startups, de-risk those research and academia. It's also a signal to mobilize the youth to choose climate when you're in academia, and also to mobilize startups to say, like, maybe my next adventure is not going to be in AI or gaming or fintech, but maybe my next adventure and my startup journey will be in the climate space, because now there's funding and significant funding. So it was a mobilizing effort, but also kind of a bridging the gap with the aversion to risk that is completely different with philanthropic dollars.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense. And I think the risk aversion is such a challenge, particularly for hard tech and science ventures, where there's such a long journey to getting to that commercial stage. How does that prize tend to change the risk calculus for those downstream investors? Like, are companies getting past specific milestones faster? Is this just kind of a vote of confidence that they look for? How does that change for them?
So the prize and the philanthropic dollars, if you will, they're coming in at a moment where you can, the winner, because it's a competition, is able to deploy it's not a sort of like, let me just go back for a second. It's not $25,000 or $10,000, although I'm sure startup will appreciate even that, but it's enough that it creates money for them to buy a key piece of equipment that they would otherwise not be able to afford.
Right.
or hire that engineer that they were really needed to kind of create that moment of scale. So it's significant enough that these are what is allowed by these funding, which then help them evolve and scale to the next threshold where they can go and really secure follow-up funding from venture studios, from VCs, from all of these different assets, because then it created a tipping point at that moment of scale for the startups. And even for the research, sometimes you're just stuck in a bind. Sometimes you need that CFO, you need that marketing person who is going to really create what is your UVP, what is the market penetration that you really need to kind of share with the audience, that you're not really there because you're maybe too focused on the technology. So from both angles of academia and startup, that philanthropic dollar, because it's not diluted, because it's not coming with strings attached, it really is able to create that moment of inflection for those innovators.
And it sounds like there's kind of prizes for multiple stages, like you've the research through to like scale ups. Are there particular inflection points that you look for or are focused on, whether that's, this, we think this will unlock capital that wouldn't otherwise come, or this company's about to break through? Or are you kind of more agnostic to, whatever the judging panels think is the most viable?
Great question. So we are when we are analyzing this, and we have an entire committee based around this, and we get an influx of hundreds of applications, coast to coast. So we are really looking at it from a very scientific perspective. First, we want to make sure that the base point is sort of infallible, that it's actually can hold in the real world, and that takes, because it's a prize and because it has to be measurable, we really go by around it with tons of carbon either not emitted or sequestered, et cetera. So it has to be measurable for this prize to actually hold. But then there's a layer of, which is maybe unique to this prize, is we bring in the business layer. Once we get to the top 25, we bring in the business layer to get to the top 10, because if it's not commercializable, if it's an amazing solution, but it will take billions of dollars to scale, that's not investable in the real world. So it needs to be that the science is there, the bankability is there for future follow-up investments. And then that together really creates the prize finalists for the top 10, to whom we give, mentorship hours and IP hours and then expertise hours. So because the funding is very important, but also the ecosystem we build around it, sort of like it takes a village for a child. This takes a village for the startup to really go on further and faster. So this is sort of the model around it, to make sure, not a guarantee, but as much as possible, ensure the key measures for success are going to be hit in a time frame that is acceptable for this to be a real-time solution.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important differentiator, even from something like a government grant that is maybe a little more agnostic, but having that eye for, commercial viability. Like, this might be a great technical solution, but does it have legs? Like, is it going to check some of those boxes? I think is such an important piece, to make sure that this goes somewhere, but also for, subsequent investors can look at this and say, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. You mentioned some of the pieces around the funding, and it's not just the funding, it's the mentorship, the service hours. Can you just talk a little bit about what else comes outside of just the check, and how that kind of model operates?
Yeah, that's the raison d'être of the festival, if you will. We could have just stuck to a prize model and then award a prize, and of course follow up on, because it's not just like, here's the check. It's not a recognition award. Really, it's a scale award, right? So the money is to further, and we do it by increments to make sure that milestone A, B, or C are really hit per what the startup or the academia has promised. So that's for the kind of the funding itself. But more than that is really making sure that through the Climate Village, we're bringing the entire ecosystem. You want to bring in the adopters, the industry. You want to bring in all sorts of capital around the same conversation. You want to be thought-provoking and having renowned world speaker, like the worldwide, that people either aspire to or can really be challenging the status quo and what they're bringing to the stage. So we've built an entire festival around it to allow for those meaningful connections to happen, where it's significant networking. It's a lot of C-suite, participants that are able to connect on a different level ground to really make sure that the winners get more than just winning. But also, if you're not a winners, you can win in another way. You can win because you got a really meaningful networking with amazing, and that has happened time and time again through our festivals. One example is, Yaltan has met with GHG said they didn't really know each other before, but then they weren't winning specifically a prize, but they wanted that connection, and they led their follow-up investment round for $12 million, I think. So sometimes you win on a stage, but in other ways, you can win just by being part of our extended family during the festival and moments before this and then moments after, because the sort of philanthropic effort around it, because we're mission driven, is also to drive the impact for all of these participants as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I've talked to some startups too where, it's just that one conversation with the CEO that then becomes a pilot or actual traction or better clarity on who your market actually is. And those go a long way.
Yeah, well, in the sense that, like you can accelerate innovation by injecting capital, but you can also do it with the visibility, the notoriety, credibility that it gives them. They can say, we won this prize. It was vetted through like a whole system. We've done the due diligence, and we've seen some of the sort of like Box One, for example, has invested in all of our winners. So sometimes we've done all the deal flow like we've done all the work. So it gives them that level up with being able to announce whether we're top finalist or we're a prize winner.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to just circle back to the role that this kind of plays in the funding ecosystem. There's capital flowing in climate tech. You have that venture capital, government granting programs, private equity, et cetera. You've mentioned a couple of times there's a gap, or this serves a role around the right time, investable ventures. Could you maybe just talk a little bit more about that? Maybe if there's like a company that comes to mind that going through the prize and going through that process really kind of had that impact of, this unlocked something net new for us.
Oh, we've seen that time and time again over the years, really since 2022, I think, when we launched it. Some of our prize winners, I can mention Opalia, Dispersa, not only did they win our prize, but, then the sort of the BDC came in and matched what we had secured for a match from the BDC, but then went on and said, you know what, we committed to 250,000, but we're going to put in 700,000 because this is really something substantial we can really sink our teeth in terms of, being able to push that from their perspective, their mandate and their strategic investment pool. But I want to also just, because we're talking about philanthropy, what we're talking like as if everybody is doing that. Only 1.7% of all Canadian philanthropic dollars go to climate. When you look at it from a macro perspective, that's really a tiny percentage.
Yeah.
We are, by our work, we're really hoping that we can even double that, because philanthropy has that ability to be able to move in a different way, but we're not doing it in significant way just yet. If we can even just go to 3.5%, if you look at the entire philanthropic landscape, when we look at, the hundreds of millions of dollars, then that could really, if you can imagine that, not just us, but really like all the different kinds of philanthropic work that can be done around climate, it would be a lot more significant with a lot of that agility and that ability to really move the needle.
Absolutely. I'm curious if you have any thoughts as to why philanthropy in climate has been so small in Canada, but globally too. And whether it's a knowledge gap or there's just competing interests. But yeah, any thoughts on like why that gap does exist?
My perception is that, let's say, the climate conversation is relatively new, and philanthropically, you want to help significant causes that are like health, poverty, underprivileged, education. These are like very, very important causes. So to divert your philanthropic dollars from causes that you like are meaningful and already has been strategically implicated in the axis of giving up philanthropic foundations and, family offices, etc., it takes like a maneuvering or shuffling of it. But I think we really need to face this as, we're on the precipice of the major challenge of humanity that's facing today. So we really need to, as a society, reevaluate where those philanthropic dollars go. Because if they're partnered with the private equity, with public funding and private funding, all of this pulled together, what we call blended finance today, that is really where those dollars are extremely, extremely needed. And I think it's just a question of also the next generation coming in and saying, this is an important cause. Climate is
Right.
important to me. You know, yes, you launched this philanthropy to help ABC. We're not saying like stop and divest from ABC, but we're saying maybe we take a bit of those funding and really directing it to climate.
Yeah, yeah. And I would imagine too, there's increasingly just an overlap between climate and some of these related issues, whether it's health, education, water. All of these things are becoming more and more intertwined as climate change kind of accelerates. So, but yeah, I could imagine if you've been operating this for 10 years and now it's this new mental model of, okay, well, how do I think about climate and how do I even have an impact on such a, huge problem?
But that's really the case for giving, right? If you understand that climate is attacking the people that are maybe the most vulnerable on coastlines, on inhabitable, and what becomes inhabitable, food security, all of those challenges are really like intertwined with the traditional philanthropy. Just have to make this more acceptable as a vehicle for advancing philanthropic efforts.
Yeah. And I'm really curious because I would imagine like we're so used to thinking in terms of return on investment, and usually that's in financial terms. What does impact return mean in practice, and like how do you communicate that to someone who's really used to thinking about financial returns?
So, I think people are looking to do things that are meaningful, and impact return is really what's meaningful. Yeah.
Hmm.
Is this sort of like, and I think the climate solutions being on the front light of ag, or energy transition, or water, and it could be fresh water, it could be ocean water, it can be like ocean as carbon capture, ocean alkalinity. There's like so many different ways. That's why we also create all these tracks at the festival, because people naturally gravitate to maybe what makes the most sense to them. And in that space, there's always a meaningful way to contribute, and that's the baseline of philanthropy. So because at the end of the day, you're not really getting anything, you're giving, you're sort of like giving away something that really touches your heart. And so even within the climate space, there's a lot of different ways and mechanisms to really support different ecosystems around, like I said, water, or whether it's DAX, whether it's the energy transition, all around the climate. There's definitely a lot of areas that are needed a lot of support.
And do you find like, is there a framework that you use, or do you find, is it more data or more storytelling about the companies that get funded? Like what resonates with folks in terms of like, oh, that I really feel like I had an impact.
I always push for the storytelling.
Yeah. Yeah.
I At the end of the day, I didn't make this up. People give to people, and people are really compelled by sort of the story of even just the story of one. It's sort of the baseline for everything, sort of in the philanthropic world. But it's even today, even as you want to tell your startup story, or your research story, your journey, people are more compelled by that journey than sort of numbers that maybe are like sometimes too big to really comprehend. You need to really drive it to like, who's it affecting, what's your solution will be solving for, and sort of like really how those dollars are going to affect real change in real time. I think that's the big draw for me, from my understanding into philanthropy. We have been able to secure a lot of support exactly by not saying be a corporate sponsor or just come in and come out. We want long-time partners. I think partnership is the key word here, because you can give like, here's $10,000. Like, this is not what we're looking for. We're really looking at someone who wants to fundamentally change something together with us, who's in it for the long run, who can really together with us even just brainstorm ideas and how can we make this. Always we're looking for the sort of the triple win: a win for CSP in driving that mission, a win for the philanthropy, the foundation, the endowment fund, whatever, the corporate sponsor, the family office, to also have their win in a tangible way. And then obviously the ultimate win is a win for the climate and the planet.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. For some of those, I mean, just that the relationship switch from, the $10,000 to long term, are you in it? Do you find that for some of the partners, this also like feeds in other objectives, whether that's corporate innovation or, if there is a venture fund in the family, like does it kind of check into some of those other boxes, or is it mostly focused on the impact through this partnership?
No, I think it actually allows certain partners that we've seen come in through over the work that we've done over the years. It really allows them also to mobilize maybe their staff, their professionals, their families around something more meaningful to really allow for like to kind of innovate in a different way, even at a large sort of bank institutional situation. Sometimes you want to be able to say, you know, this is business, but this is also for now tangentially not core business, but it can
Right.
become that. And you want to signal, as an example, we have a lot of bank support.
Hmm.
I think, if you pull together the banks in Canada, for sure, they're one of the biggest employers together. If, we don't believe in punitive action, I think every step is a step in the right direction. So we are really mobilizing and creating a safe space where we're not saying like, this is competitive, this is collaboration. And so collaboration is a different space where we can work and nurture and advance together. And it just sets a different tone for all of it. And for the institution, for the whether it's a family office, whether it's a philanthropic foundation, but I think this is really the signal that it also allows to create around.
You mentioned the next generation of philanthropy, and I believe you're adding some programming around family offices. And this is a topic that's come up more and more, I think, in climate tech circles, is realizing that family offices are out there and are an interesting part of the capital stack, but they're also like I think fairly opaque. Like a lot of people don't understand like what they are and how they operate. I'd love to know like what prompted some of this work around family offices, and what are you finding about how maybe that next generation is starting to think about climate?
So we've, the statistics show that about 5% of family office funding is going to climate. But if you really look at the pooled effort and funding that lives right now in family offices, we're talking trillions of dollars. We need trillions of dollars for the transition to happen. So if we were able to mobilize family offices to really dig deeper and like even just again double from 5% to 10%, that could be transformative. So if, instead of sprinkling here and there, the idea to create a family office forum is allow them to not sort of be harassed, but really find a safe space, Chatham House rules to say like, we've failed miserably at this, but we've really being successful at that. Have a genuine, authentic conversation of how they've decided to lean in into climate investment or climate, like dabbing slowly in maybe in water or in alternative energy but it's going to need a lot of that to come into focus as opposed to stay opaque. And so the idea was to create a safe space for that to meaningful conversation to happen in a way that we can show what power they have and how they can really implement and deploy it, because it does take mobilizing capital, but it takes also mobilizing human capital. We have a lot of that. And if we can just do a little bit of education to promote and help them sort of really be a key stakeholder of that transition, I think that can be really huge and transformative.
Yeah, absolutely. I find or I would imagine one of the challenging parts if you're a fund or a family office is you maybe don't have all the infrastructure around you that a large investment firm might have. From what you've seen, like what are some of the big pieces or like enabling parts that would really unlock more for philanthropy, whether it's due diligence or that network of, Chatham House rules? Like are there specific pieces that have jumped out where, more resources might move the needle?
I think it's sort of like a bit more macro in the sense that family offices, especially the third, fourth, fifth generation, et cetera, they're inheriting, huge amount of wealth, and they're really worried, and rightfully so, about preservation of wealth. They don't want to be that generation that dilapidates that. And there's always this misconception or apprehension around climate investing that this will be like you're doing it just to do something good for the planet. You're not really doing it for the wealth. And then you're going to be the generation that creates that. And you don't want to be
Yeah.
that generation. But what we're trying to showcase and that you can do well by doing good, that you can decide to do just preservation of wealth, but I strongly believe that it's going to be the climate revolution. The next, sort of like what Larry Fink was saying, the next $1,000 billion unicorns are coming from the climate space. So you can be on the bandwagon or you can be off it. We're trying to say there's clear opportunities in the climate space. And you need to be part of it, not because you're doing it just to be good. You're doing it because you want to grow that wealth. You want to preserve it, but you also have opportunities to be the generation that really takes it to the next level. So why like stand on the status quo instead of like taking that opportunity to grow it? And the
Yeah.
climate is that opportunity. We see it with China today. Once you hit that parity and beyond parity and you create that tipping point where it's actually cheaper to electrify with alternative energies, with geothermal, with nuclear, with all of the different things that climate allows, with regenerative ag, with the AI, with for clean, and all that scalability. That's great, incredible opportunity for the family offices, but also for private equities and VCs and everything around that.
Yeah, yeah. No, that really resonates. And someone described climate tech and climate solutions recently as essentially the future of production and consumption.
Mm.
And I think increasingly that's how we're seeing these solutions show up. They are nice to have, but they're not just nice to have. Like they are really, changing industry, changing our power systems, all these kinds of things. So that really resonates in terms of how people can be thinking of that. And then on the flip side, from maybe a founder perspective, or even like a VC that's like maybe raising from family offices and things like that, you mentioned kind of the storytelling as a way to communicate impact. Are there other maybe lessons learned or things that startups should keep in mind when they're pitching a family office or a philanthropic donation that might help them kind of navigate that conversation better?
So so what startups need is our patient capital. Unfortunately, VCs, they have to show returns
Yeah.
and private equity. And so this is sort of the mismatch because you need something more patient. You need to be able to do the first of a kinds, the proof of concepts, the deployment, the pilot projects. So this is sort of like one pool of funding. And then on the later pool of funding, you need to be able to really have those means to be able to scale that. But all of that needs for the capital to be a lot more patient and a lot more resilient. And so maybe, with those sort of, for example, the green bonds, the green loans, also, we need to also be not so tight with the terms, because if you look at the VC terms today, as an example, they're so difficult sometimes, especially for climate, who's like deep tech, and the scaling is a lot more funding, heavy. We just need to kind of maybe relook at this and reset where the ROIs are and how patient we can be with it, to be pragmatic around it, because at the end of the day, listen, there's going to be some failures, but there's going to be a lot of payoff. And if we can just wait for those inflection moments to not be so impatient, that will create major tipping points, I think, for a lot of innovation. Because obviously we launched it because we strongly believe in human ingenuity. We feel that, humanity can tackle this. We just need the means to match our ambitions.
Yeah, yeah. So I'd love to shift and talk a little bit about the future. But before I do, I was curious, is there anything that you find, any common misconceptions or misunderstandings you find people have about the Climate Solutions Prize that you're like constantly trying to clear up?
Well, it's exactly we're sort of like on the discussion that we've
Yeah.
had, like sort of why a prize? Is it really necessary? How can one prize change, the
Mm,
world? But we've seen it around the world. We've seen it with X Prize, we've seen it with Earthshot. There's prizes that have, maybe at different levels, and certainly some prizes need an investment and need more time and sort of a longer sort of runway to be able to get that 10 million, etc. But I think the misconception is, can philanthropy really move the needle? Can prizes actually shake things up? So we've been tracking our prize winners, for the last 4 years. So, and we've deployed about $12 million in mobilized capital for $12 million of prizes. And all of our winners have gone on together to follow-up investment of about 120 million in 3 years, 10x. That's really awesome. So if we can get more support, more prizes that we can create, like what we want to call challenges, specifically with certain industries, whether it's in built environment, whether it's in ag, whether it's in water, to do specific challenges, because a lot of startups also just, why don't I do this? Like, instead of doing this, why don't you really look at real world challenges and solve for that? That's what prizes create. Like, these are real world challenges, whether it's in fashion, whether it's in pharma, and let's solve for that specifically. And I think the
Yeah.
prize create that mechanism and allow for people to convene around that, both from the capital perspective and from the talent perspective.
Yeah. And so if we look ahead, if everything goes right, what's your vision for the Climate Solutions Prize in the next 5 to 10 years?
Jokingly, I guess the aspiration is to become the Davos for climate,
Okay. Yeah.
to really being able to mobilize more capital, more prize funding, and really just create a bigger village around all of that. I mean, if we're super successful, we'll be out of business because we'll
Yeah.
all the solutions that are necessary, because it's not one silver bullet. It's going to take a lot of solutions, but that's the goal, right? Is to really being able to say, like, we solved for the climate change, and sort of like the ozone. Some prizes historically have been able to solve serious technological, call it, challenges. That's the goal.
Wonderful. Yeah. And I've noticed that the folks that attend are from, all across the world. Curious how you think, your kind of home is Montreal. How do you think about, bringing this to the rest of Canada and to the rest of the world? Or, is this bringing people here to Montreal?
Great question. Yes, everywhere we go, we're asked, can you bring the prize to the US? Can you bring it to the global south? Like, in the global south, we were told, they have micro investments. So, maybe a $25,000 in the global south is equivalent to, $250,000 maybe in Canada. We initially launched this for Quebec because we really felt Montreal is really well positioned geographically, economically, with talent to be that gateway to Europe, which is sort of a decade ahead of us, and to North Americas, which we are aspiring and working to be where we need to be, but we're not there yet. And so, yes, we are in the process of expanding our prize to, I mean, we've already launched it from coast to coast for all of
Right.
Canada. And that was our inauguration of that happened last year. And we're considering now, we're really sort of developing partnerships with pockets in the US, whether it's, obviously the West Coast is very climate aligned, and the East Coast, but really even in the Midwest, even in Texas, where you won't think that there's a lot of appetite for it. But we think at the end of the day, when you look at it from a pragmatic standpoint, from the pragmatic economy, whether, we're trying to be completely apolitical, but really from an economic standpoint, climate is the next sort of investment opportunity. And if you want to be doing well by doing good,
Yeah.
I think that is the biggest opportunity for this prize to go on further, to deploy faster, to have more meaningful moments, and to really arrive to different areas of the world.
No, it seems like such perfect timing too, where increasingly international ventures and investors seem to be looking at Canada as this great, place to build, gateway to markets. Like, it's a really interesting place. And I think, being positioned at that is really interesting time to be positioned there. Was there anything we didn't touch on that you think we should cover?
Great question. It's just maybe talking about inaction. I think in the investment pool of funds, all of it from the micro tiny venture studio all the way to the mega large financial institutions, I think currently and historically we like predictability. And if we just change from that perspective to maybe like the greater opportunities that exist instead of just the what's predictable, which is really historically how we've termed are like the loans and the investments, whether it's banks or VCs. If we can just shift from that, I think that will be like the gateway to really make significant improvements into how we invest and how we catalyze and how we mobilize the funding that is really, really needed for this challenge to be solved.
That's really interesting. And is that things like fund timelines? Is that loan rates? Like, are there any specific things that come to mind? Or like, these are some levers we could really be changing how we think about them?
Well, in the sense that, not everybody can build a $1 billion unicorn.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if we can just kind of like, if we can make participation in climate feel accessible, whether it's from the bonds and the loans and the credit and the terms, if we can make it more accessible, and not just kind of hit only for the home runs that are mega super successful, but other successful measures along the way, that can be transformative for the entire investment world. And I think we need to kind of say we can divest from everything right away. I mean, otherwise you can't eat tomorrow morning. You need transportation, you need the distribution channels, you need all of that to still exist. But if you can just transition in a way that's allowing for all of that to happen as well in parallel, because certain funds are open with different terms, sort of like when you see the SVPs, if you can create those, not those gaps, but those opportunities, well, then while you still run the traditional business model, I think that's what's going to really, that together will really be able to kind of channel us to the next generation.
No, that makes so much sense. And there's got to be a market out there, a gap out there is just waiting for someone to create the right vehicle for it and get probably a huge return.
And the lines are already being blurred a little bit, right? I mean, you hear a lot more and more about blended finance. That's sort of like, that's a strategy that we're probably, instead of isolating some of the startups that maybe are not the biggest mover and shaker right now, but if you blur the line with the blended finance coming from philanthropy to de-risk, like the follow up with the family offices funding, and then going to the bigger VCs, because you need those super scalers as well, right?
For sure.
Need all of that to you need that continuum of investment, but you need them to blend and discuss this together and kind of create those moments and opportunities for it to be really grown at the pace that we need for it to grow. Otherwise, yes, we just don't have the luxury for this to take 20, 50 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So blended finance is a really interesting area. Are there areas where you're seeing seeing traction, and are there any other areas where you're like, we really need more to come together here?
Well, there's areas that are really benefiting more for sure. Like, for a while it was all the food tech got a lot of momentum, but then guess what? You get a lot of momentum. There's a lot of cash burn because you see all of this happening, and then maybe the results are not the best results because you're not, even as a startup, you're not really making the best use of the funding that you got necessarily because there's an influx of that. So there's areas in the geothermal, in the nuclear, in the DAX facilities that are like very deep tech. When you want to transform industries, the built environment, you need to invest strategically, but you need to be able to support in a sort of long-term way, especially when it's bigger funding, because maybe the food tech was sort of like easier. But when you want to really talk about regenerative ag, soil preservation, if you want to look at nature as a capital asset today, not as just like that you can extract from, but something that you can really build together with the existing, because like look at all the mega fires. So that needs to also be investable technology where you can measure properly, you can really evaluate strategically, and then you can really invest in a way that is significant, not by just kind of putting nature aside, but really bringing it into the capital asset and the stack of where you can invest in.
Yeah. And I mean, that just, I feel like captures exactly where philanthropy can play, is all of these areas where figure out the structure, support those like long-term transformational bets. And it sounds like that's exactly where philanthropy and catalytic capital is primed to play a role.
Right. It's because it needs to be flexible. It needs to be courageous capital to allow for those moment of inflections to happen.
Well, Galith, I think that's a perfect place to end it. Where should people find you and learn more about the Climate Solutions Prize?
The major Climate Solutions Prize 2026 is happening in, I think, about 10 days.
Yep.
June 8 and 9 in Montreal. We'd love to have innovators, startups, investors, philanthropists, family offices join us. It's in Montreal at Marché Bon Secours, so in the historic old Port of Montreal. And we have like thought leaders coming from all over the world, really from Switzerland and France and Trinidad and Tobago, like really Australia. We have thought leaders joining us from really all 5 continents, and we'd love to have people participate in the audience and the journey of the Climate Solutions Prize.
Well, Galith, thanks again for spending some time with us. This was a really great conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity, Justin.
Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave a rating and a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It would mean a lot and helps grow the show. To stay in the loop on Canadian climate tech news, recent fundraising, job postings, events, and more, subscribe to the Climate Tech Canada newsletter on our website. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.